Pinion angle, there's not a lot of good documentation. Majority of it's for like guys with lifted trucks. So like everything, all the information I need is going the opposite way. It's guys who are lifted, right? Majority of stuff I read, it's typically that you want less degrees on this because the thinking is when you load it up, it'll nose up. But you know, majority that's for like muscle cars and lifted trucks, which is totally, which may not apply to us with short arm, long arm. I'll give you another example, right? Like this took a long time for me to research. Was that if you notice at a certain heights when you lower the car, the diff will actually be higher than the shifter tower. Also different than like if you have a lifted truck too, right? Because normally it's the other way, right? You think the diff should be lower than the shifter tower, lower than the transmission. So like Corolla is really interesting in that way, right? And then no wonder why so many people have problems with geometry. This is Autohaus Z, and today we're going to do a how-to video on pinion angle adjustment.
Hey, what's up guys? This is Grant with Battle Garage.
So Grant, before we do this pinion angle adjustment, let's talk about some of the parts on this car that have to do with how we're going to adjust pinion angle and then how all these work in conjunction.
So the main thing that we want to talk about is four-link angle, which is really important, especially if you have a one-piece drive shaft, which this customer does as well. But what I'm also really excited about is we've got the new Breeze Fab adjustable four links on here with the street durometer polyurethane bushings on both ends, on top and bottom. And the top of these guys are adjustable as well as the bottom. So that's gonna let Ezekiel get the pinion angle dialed in, you know, however is needed for this particular car.
Yeah. One thing I like about these four links is like all the options you can get. So this particular customer chose to get poly bushed on both sides, and then like you were saying, you can choose two different diameters of bushings. So these purple bushings are the street ones, and you can have a harder, more track oriented bushing, which is the black poly bushing.
There's actually a lot of options, and we're kind of dialing in to see to try to streamline it a little bit more. But as of right now, Breeze Fab can make these in either in Heim on both ends, Heim on one end, or poly and Heim on one end, or poly on both sides. And then on top of that, he offers a different diameter for how stiff you want the polyurethane bushings to be. And you know, one thing that I think is really important to note is Ryan over at Breeze Fab went out of his way to make a jig to slightly offset the mount on this rod by 15 degrees, because he noticed that the factory mounts actually have a little bit of a bend right here. So it's coming straight back from the car, and as it meets the axle, the OEM four link actually has a 15 degree bend right here. And so he built that into this product just to make sure there's no more chance of binding than you would with a factory part. And I'm personally really impressed with that. I think that shows a lot of attention to detail, and we're really excited for Breeze Fab to get more and more involved with these vehicles.
What else green do we have on the back of this car, Grant?
Well, speaking of green, we were fortunate that Breeze Fab was able to make these in the BGRS green just for us. So this color is available just through Battle Garage. And this customer has Annex suspension through us, as well as the Battle Garage Swiss springs back here. And overall, all the mods in this car are helping the customer get exactly what he wants, which is a fun, daily driver that isn't too harsh to drive, that is enjoyable. It still has performance to help him keep up with more modern cars. And this is a great combo of all those parts that gives kind of that balanced package, right? And so I say that because he's got polyurethane front and back on here, which is going to reduce noise into the cabin, but it's still poly, so there's a lot less movement of the axle under accel and also going over bumps. He's got the Swiss springs that are designed to be just mildly progressive on the back, and that helps to allow the axle to articulate and move just a little bit over some of the, I'd say, small to medium-sized bumps, and kind of let the rear end stay planted. But then as the car gets loaded up, either under heavy throttle or heavy cornering, you get into the linear range of the spring. And that happens very quickly. It's not like a normal progressive spring where you've got a whole bunch of progression, then at the very end it becomes linear. We're talking just just as the car sits on the ground and the axle starts to move, that's when you start to move into the linear rate, which I think is a
This is 5.5.
5.5, yeah.
And that's one thing I want to ask you about. Why don't we go to the front of the car and see how the suspension on the front pairs well with the suspension on the back, and I'll ask you about the spring rates. All right, Grant, how come we don't get green springs in the front too?
Well, that's interesting. So because they made us a custom spring for us, I'm talking about Swift right now. We were able to choose whatever color we wanted for the back. But Swift is they're pretty strict about their coloring guidelines for their springs. If you ever see different colored Swift springs, all that means is that it's a different inner diameter. So the spring rates can be different, the heights can be different, but for every different inner diameter that Swift offers, there's a different color associated with it. So Annex is using a, I think they're like a 60 millimeter ID spring, and those all come blue. If you see Coilover springs that are that bronze color, like for a Coilover, metric Coilover spring, then those would be, I think, a 65 millimeter ID.
So one question I had for you, because I thought you had a pretty long conversation with this customer about choosing spring rates. And one of the interesting things, the spring rate choice was interesting on this for me. A 7 in the front, 5.5 in the rear. Why'd you choose 7 and 5.5?
So that's an interesting question, and we actually get asked that quite often. If someone wants a more stable car, meaning like if they're cornering and then and on throttle, they kind of want it to just like have a mild understeer or maybe just be neutral. On a lot of cars, the 7K in the front with the 4.7 Swiss springs in the rear is a good balance for that. And I'm talking about the divorce setup. True rear is a little bit different story. But and also like a hatchback will weigh more than a coupe, and those are other things to consider as well. Beams is heavier than a regular 4AG, and the weight is farther forward, things like that. But yeah, so if someone wants a more neutral feeling, then that would be the spring rate I'd recommend. This particular customer, he seems to be a little more comfortable with oversteer, and I think that's because he drove the car in snow and all kinds of different environments, right? So he's very experienced at that. So he wanted the rear end to feel a little more lively, so we opted for the 5.5 setup. And then also, I'm not too nervous about that with the over rotating, because he has wisely chosen to upgrade the front sway bar with the larger Cusco bar, and he's using the OEM rear bar, which will allow the rear to keep as much grip as possible by relying more on the springs to control the body roll and the loading, and the sway bar is there just to kind of stabilize it. And I personally like this pairing of having a larger front bar and an OEM rear bar, because it helps you get grip coming out of the turns, especially for drift cars. I think you'll find that the cars have more grip exiting turns. You can carry more speed through a turn if you use that sway bar setup, but then balance the spring rates to get the handling that you want. All right, so we're back at the car now. Ezekiel, why would we want to adjust the pinion angle on a car?
So the typical biggest reason you hear about adjusting pinion angle is when someone's running a one-piece drive shaft. And the most common thing you'll hear is like, hey, at highway speeds, like past 70 miles an hour, I can feel this thing vibrating. And sure enough, when this customer car came in, he had factory 4 links, and he was running a one-piece drive shaft. So what are some ways to know your pinion angle is wrong? When this car came in, the transmission output shaft was heavily leaking, and then so was the pinion seal. And that's actually one really good indicator, is that if your pinion angle's off, that means the U-joints at either end are spinning at different speeds, and that'll translate that vibration into all other components. So, of course, the other indicator of your pinion angle being off is you can either hear the rumble in the car, or you can feel it in the car. It's pretty apparent, like the floorboard feels like it's rumbling. So yeah, that's exactly why I recommended this customer get adjustable 4 links, and then specifically these guys, brand new from Breeze Fab. And then in this particular special color, he's the first one who has the all Battle Garage green. So first of all, I want to give a big shout out to Assassin 10,000, who was the guy who came up with this write-up on the forums. And I still have the exact angle cube that he recommended. This is actually my second one. So before you even attempt pinion angle adjustment, you need to make sure that the weight of the car is at all 4 wheels. So I have a pole jack under the rear diff right now to make sure that the rear end of the car is at ride height. Ideally, the best way to do this if you had like a four-wheel lift or a pit and the weight of the car was on all four wheels. Majority of you guys are doing this out of your garage, so if you're going to adjust pinion angle, make sure the jack stands are under the rear axle housing. Or how are we measuring pinion angle? The most accurate way, you should actually take the drive shaft out and then be putting this cube directly on the output of the transmission, and then also the flange of the rear differential. Okay, so although most accurate, it's probably not feasible for us to take the drive shaft out every single time, and then fluid's gonna come out also. So this is another like really common way to do it, is to get a socket and put it on top of your angle cube. And what we're gonna do, if you follow me this way, this socket is gonna go inside that U-joint cup. And one key thing you guys want to make sure, we're measuring the drive line angle. So you want to make sure you're touching the U-joint on the yoke right here coming out of the transmission, not the drive shaft. So we'll make sure that this guy's straight up and down. And 4.35. We'll take another measurement. Typically the most reoccurring measurement, that's typically your most accurate one, but 4.3, so 4.3, 4.35, that's pretty close, which is about right. The Corolla drive shaft angle, I think, has documented as 4 degrees, so 4.2, 4.3, that's, or 4.3, 4.35, that's pretty accurate. So we'll go back to the rear diff, and again, you want to measure the cup off of the rear diff flange, not the drive shaft itself. So we'll go back here. And 6.3. So this is 6.3 degrees nose up. And then the transmission is 4.35 nose down. So to put it really simple, equal but opposite. How do we do that? So that's why you need adjustable forelinks, and depending on how you lengthen or shorten the forelinks. So right now I have too much nose up, so I actually need to shorten the top forelinks. And when we shorten the forelinks, the nose will aim down. So I'm going to shorten the forelinks on top, and then until I can get to about 4.3. So right now we want 4.3 degrees, equal but opposite on both ends. So we're gonna get the nose of this guy 4.3 degrees up to match the 4.3 degrees down of the transmission. It's always good to calibrate these. There's a 0 button on the angle cube, so you gotta find a good place to calibrate it. So a couple things to mention when you're measuring pinion angle: always do it the same way every single time. So when I did it this time, I made sure this reading was facing me on the passenger side, and I made sure the socket was the same way in the same spot. Just so the more repeatability you can get, the more accurate your measurement. So right now it says 385. Yeah, you want to measure both U-joints every single time. You don't know, the drive shaft's gonna turn, bunch of other variables. So 385, I got that twice, so 385. There's 380. Try that again. 380. Being we're at 3.8, 3.85, we're gonna start there. And what you want to do is drive the car. Do you feel a vibration on the freeway? Do you hear any like abnormal like rumbling or grumbling noises? Typically you can feel it in like the ass of your seat or like the floorboards. And we'll go from there. Maybe because every chassis is a little bit different, maybe I'll need to make another adjustment, like lower or raise the pinion angle a little bit. But this is a good starting point.
Do you need to do anything to make sure that the links are even left to right?
I'm glad you asked. Yes. So, don't just shorten these all the way and install them and expect them to be straight on either side of the chassis. And I'll give you guys an example of what I found. So, at some point, this car had accident damage because the OEM four-link actually had a bend in it. So, I noticed when I installed these fully wound in, fully compressed, that when I use my metric tape measure and measure from bolt center to bolt center, they were actually not even on each side, which tells me probably the bodies probably got kinked one way or the other. So to get yourself a starting point when you install your four links, make sure bolt center to bolt center, and that'll be your most accurate measurement. And then the last thing you do when the car's at full droop and you have your divorced coilover set up, like we have the Annex suspension coilovers here, is that you want to adjust your rear spring preload, because depending on how the pinion is angled, that'll also put some preload on the springs. So if you want to see how to adjust rear spring preload or install the Annex suspension coilovers on the Corolla, I will leave a link to the video below straight from the Annex suspension YouTube channel.
So thank you guys for watching the video on how to set the pinion angle on this car. And Ezekiel, thanks for having me as a guest on here, and we appreciate all the help and helpful videos you've been making, and please keep it up, man.
I want these four links. How do I buy them?
You can buy these on the Battle Garage website, or send us an email or give us a call, and we can let you know the options that are available.
Okay, if you want these four links, make sure you need to battle. You need to battle these guys. No, send them an email. Yeah.